Hi there, my name is Ollie Perrault, and I am an 18-year-old youth climate activist from Western Massachusetts. I am a community organizer and a climate justice advocate, and I am the current director of Youth Climate Action Now, as well as a leading member of Mass Audubon's and the Hitchcock Center's Youth Climate Leadership Program, where I help organize our annual Youth Climate Justice Summits. And I'm here today to share a little bit about my climate story and to tell you all why I am a climate activist. And I want to start by sharing this very vivid image that I have from the summer of 2023 of standing on the banks of a river that should not have been there. My family and I were at the edge of the floodwaters on this blisteringly hot day in mid-July at the height of summer. And I can remember watching as the floodwater gushed over the split concrete and the broken up asphalt of the driveway, carrying all of this dark and murky topsoil and silt and river weeds that had been washed out in the flood. And I can remember watching my father wading out waist deep into the water past this crooked, slightly mangled road sign that read active farmland. And I remember noticing that the bold printed letters were half submerged under the rushing current. After months of endless rain and these nights spent staying up late with my family watching the weather forecast, my family's farm had experienced a catastrophic flooding event that washed away over half of our annual harvest, submerging over 40 acres of farmland underwater. And just hours before that moment that I remember, where we all were standing on the edge of that water, that area that we looked out upon, that had been acres of beautiful farmland, rows of sun-kissed summer squash, heirloom tomatoes ripening on the vine, watermelon and cantaloupe, golden sweet corn bursting from their husks, all ready for harvest. And in a matter of just hours, we had just this ocean of loss stretched out before us. And growing up on my family's farm, my childhood has been full of these deep and intrinsic sense of connection to my community through food and through the miracle of farming, this process of turning sunshine and seeds into acres of bee-busy flower fields, rows of sweet cherry tomatoes, and enough food to feed over 2,000 families from our local Western Mass area with fresh, local, organic produce. But this sense of amazement and wonder was opposed by a feeling of anxiety about the monumental risks that come with farming in the age of the climate crisis. Young people today all around the globe are growing up with this intense sense of fear for our futures and fear of environmental destruction. And I am one of many people who are growing up witnessing and experiencing these impacts quite literally in my backyard, on my family's business, and on my community that I love so much and that I feel so deeply connected to. And flooding has always been a part of farming throughout human history, and that's especially true for our farmland in the Connecticut River Valley and the alluvial soils that we farm. So as the ice melt trickles down from Vermont, the riverbanks near our field will pretty regularly overflow every spring as it gets hotter. And as the floodwaters recede, the river leaves behind these fertile deposits of nutrient-rich silt and clay minerals that leave the soil healthier than they were before. And this annual cycle of flooding and regrowth has taught me an invaluable lesson about the resilience of the natural world and the importance of learning from that resilience. And as weather patterns are becoming more extreme, these flooding patterns are becoming unpredictable, and it's getting increasingly challenging to mitigate the impacts of climate change on local agricultural economies. In the days ensuing the flood in 2023, my family was grappling with the reality of farming in the age of the climate crisis. I can remember my father borrowing a kayak and paddling through fields that had become rivers where we should have been harvesting a summer bounty. I can remember news crews swarming our driveway the morning after the flood, preparing for the arrival of the governor who would be announcing disaster relief funding. And in the midst of all of this pain and loss, there were also many moments of intense beauty. One morning, I woke up to find a bundle of poems tied with tomato twine and gently placed on our front doorstep. Someone had anonymously collected these poems and given them to me and my family as this small way to commemorate the loss of the flood and to give us hope for the next summer through the gift of poetry. Our community also found ways to support us. They donated to our GoFundMe, and they showed up to our distributions even when we only had sweet potatoes to give out. And they sent us this flood of messages that we would start hanging up on our barn walls in the coming months. These were handwritten drawings from children. They were postcards and well wishes. They were love letters to the farm, describing the connections to the earth and this deep-rooted sense of belonging to this land that had been cultivated through our farming community. And people were sharing with us new stories about how meaningful this community has been to them over the years. And eventually, we had enough of these messages to cover an entire wall in our farm store. And in the wake of the flood, I was incredibly inspired by this newfound community support, and I was spurred into action by the detrimental impacts of climate change that my family was going through and trying to adapt to. And I started trying to seek out ways to cultivate resilience and to build hope within myself as well as for my community. I discovered a deep passion for collective action and grassroots organizing, and I began to explore this idea of active hope, which is this idea that hope for young people growing up in the age of the climate crisis with climate anxiety and with the experiences of eco-grief, hope cannot just be this sort of passive, cross your fingers kind of wishing. Hope must be an active and intentional practice that we must work to move towards every day. And that can look like so many different things. That can look like attending an educational climate summit. It can look like advocating and lobbying for youth-written legislation in our state government. It can look like organizing rallies and strikes to protest climate injustices and to demand climate mitigation. It can look like hosting a climate poetry open mic to hear the stories of our community members told through the interdisciplinary mode of artistic expression and storytelling. Ultimately, this experience of climate loss after the flooding event in 2023 awakened me to the importance of taking direct action and the importance of practicing an intentional rejection of apathy in order to choose hope. In times of grief and loss, when we do not have control over the ways our lives are uprooted by the disruptions of global warming and natural disasters, it is essential to remember that we do have control over the ways we choose to respond and to recover. Thank you so much for listening to my climate story. If you are a young person interested in adding your voice to the climate conversation and to the fight for a just and livable future for all, please consider getting involved with Youth Climate Action Now, which is my organization. We are based in Western Mass. You can find us on Instagram or on our website, and we are always looking for more youth leaders to get involved.